From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. K-State's Brian Briggeman and Brady Brewer kick off today's show by taking a look at the recent interest rates and how they've influenced agricultural rates and what we can possibly expect moving forward. Then Matt Norville, Community Forestry Program Coordinator for the Kansas Forest Service, discusses the continued spread of the emerald ash borer. He says that the invasive insect has now been confirmed in 15 Kansas counties. And K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk rounds out the show with information on how dairy producers can be more involved in increasing participation in 4-H. It's all just ahead on Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Tuesday show discussing how interest rates have changed with K-State Associate Professor in Agricultural Economics, Brady Brewer, and he's also joined by Director of the Arthur Capper Cooperative Center at K-State, Brian Briggeman. Brady, Brian, thank you both so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you, Shelley.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Brian, starting off with you, talking about where we have been with interest rates.
Well, leading up to the most recent vote from the Federal Open Market Committee, the committee that sets the interest rates or the federal funds rate, we had a very rapid rise in interest rates. It was to combat inflation that many of us all probably still even feel a little bit today because inflation has stuck around. But the reason for the interest rate rise was just to fight inflation. Interest rates were held steady for a period, number of months. But here, the Fed, looking at the economic conditions, actually did vote to lower interest rates by 50 basis points, which was pretty significant. A lot of the reasoning for the Fed to lower interest rates, that was mostly to normalize monetary policy, to bring interest rates into, off of that, the highs that they have been at to fight inflation. So they felt, the Fed in their report said that inflation is coming under control, not that it's at their target rate of 2%, but it's approaching that. And also to the labor market appears to be coming more into balance, seeing more of those jobs being taken and that holding. But with that said, the Fed, it doesn't have to be unanimous. In fact, you can have dissenting votes. And there was one dissenting vote from a Federal Reserve Board governor, an individual who votes on the FOMC. Her name is Michelle Bowman, who's actually from Council Grove, Kansas. So she dissented, saying that 50 basis points is too rapid. It should be more at 25 basis points. So still to come down, but not at the clip that ultimately did vote. And she pointed more to, we're not at our inflation target of 2%, and the labor market does, appear to be pretty strong. So there's really no need to normalize policy that quickly. So that, just to kind of catch up real quick where we're at, but it looks like interest rates may be going down.
What does this mean then for as we do look forward?
So looking forward, the FOMC, they do provide these projections in what is called the dot plot. So in an effort for more transparency, the FOMC provides projections, so looking forward. And one of the rates that I follow, one of the projections I follow, is the longer-term Fed funds rate. So what is the Fed in terms of what are they generally thinking where where interest rates are going? Like, so you say normalizing. Well, what does that mean? Like, what's their target? And if you look at those projections, it's anywhere right around just below 3%, about 2.9% currently where they're projecting it to be. And it's been down to even 2.5%. So that 2.5% to 3%, when you say normalizing policy, that's where I would say that they're heading. Looking forward forward to, the next couple of meetings. I would fully expect that they will continue to lower interest rates, moving to that longer run projection that they have. So will it be the 50 basis points that we saw? I don't know if it'll be quite that because the economy is holding up pretty strong. But I would fully expect, at least a 25% basis point decrease in next of each votes coming up.
Brady, when we look at this from an agricultural standpoint for interest rates, where do we stand?
Yeah, so what Brian was talking about was the Fed funds rate, which is the interbank interest rate that the Fed charges banks when they need money or don't have money on deposit, which really sets kind of the interest rates that you and I as a consumer will get on our mortgages and other loans, including agricultural loans. But when we look at agricultural interest rates, which is what farmers are paying for farm machinery interest rates or operating or land loans, if you look at from a national perspective, the Kansas City Federal Reserve puts out a lot of good data on what's happening in the agricultural credit markets. Our 30-year average is right at about 6.17%. In the middle of 2024, operating notes were at 8.09%. Farm machinery interest rates were at 8.21, and kind of the average for all agricultural loans was around 8.29%. So we're about 2 percentage points higher than kind of the long run average. So we're a little bit elevated. Brian alluded to the kind of rapid increase in the Fed's funds rate, and that's what this has led to. If we're looking at just interest rates here in the Kansas City Federal Reserve District, we're actually a little bit higher than the national average. The historical average going back to the early 1990s is right around 7.3, but the operating notes are right around 8.8, farm machinery is at 8.4, and the average for all farm loans is right around 8.04%. So again, we're a little bit higher than this long-run average.
Why are we higher?
Well, this goes back to the cost of funds that Brian was alluding to. So in the effort to combat inflation, the Fed has increased the Fed funds rate, which is what banks get charged for the money that they loan us. One of the main things we look at when we think about where interest rates are going is, especially in agriculture with the farm credit system not being able to take checkable deposits, they have to go to the bond market to get their cost of funds. So when you look at kind of bond yields, and here I'm looking at the BAA bond, which is a good quality, not very risky bond yield. It's actually currently below the interest rate for all farm loans. So that's a good sign because that means that the cost of funds in agriculture probably hasn't increased as much as maybe the general economy has, and could be a sign that we could see some easing in the interest rates for agriculture here in the near future.
When we break this down, what does it really mean for Kansas producers?
Yeah, so I think one of the question of the day is what will interest rates do going forward through the end of 2024 and even into 2025? One of the things I like to look at when thinking about where interest rates are going is looking at where interest rates are relative to some other benchmark, which in this case, I'm going to use a 10-year Treasury yield. And when you look at, so a lot of different organizations put out forecasts of where these Treasury yields are going to go. And traditionally, the average interest rate in agriculture is right at about 2 percentage points higher than this 10-year Treasury. And this forecast has the 10-year Treasury yield declining about 1 percentage point. So think about where we are from that average. So we're at about 8-7%, depending on what type of agricultural loan you're thinking about. Through the end of 2024, beginning of 2025, they have this 10-year Treasury going down about another percentage point. So again, you add pretty heavily correlated to agriculture. That means agricultural interest rates are going to come down about another percentage point.
When we look at just for the average consumer, as a lot of farmers have families too, what does it mean for them?
No, that's a great question because, you pick up a newspaper or you hear people talking about interest rates. You're maybe listening to Agriculture Today and they're like, maybe you're not a farmer. You just live in rural Kansas and you're interested in what's going on. Well, what does this mean? Are interest rates going down and that's going to, make things better for me because, the stock market's going up, people are reacting positively to the news. Well, that's not necessarily the case. Interest rates take time to go through the economy. And also when consumers today are going to the grocery store, they're going to fill up their vehicles with fuel, they're still facing high prices. If you're renting, rents have not come down as quickly either on some of those inflation measures. So you're still feeling it, right, in terms of what got us to the point where the Fed was raising interest rates so high. Now, there have been some improvements, but still for today, for the average consumer, probably not going to notice it that much. There's still some challenges that are out there. But again, hopefully, as far as the Fed, as they're projecting out and trying to navigate and not have a recession, have this soft landing, that's all going to be, wait to see. But right now, for the average consumer, it's still tough.
When will we hear more about interest rates?
So the Federal Open Market Committee meets periodically throughout the year, but they put out their summary of economic projections, which is what they think interest rates, their forward-looking projection of interest rates once a quarter. So we will start hearing again about this at the beginning of 2025. There are 2 more FOMC meetings here at the end of 2024 where they could vote on a different interest rate policy, as Brian alluded to, so either lowering another 25 to 50 basis points. But we don't get much more information in terms of where they think they're going to go in the future until the beginning of 2025.
Brian, Brady, I appreciate you both taking the time to join us today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That was Kansas State University Associate Professor in the Department of Agricultural Economics, Brady Brewer, and he was joined by the Director of the Arthur Capper Cooperative Center at Kansas State University, Brian Briggeman, as they discussed the decision of the Federal Open Market Committee and interest rates. If you're interested in finding out more information from the Department of Agricultural Economics here at Kansas State University, the best way to do that is by checking out AgManager.info. I, of course, will link this website in today's show notes on agtoday.net. And just as a reminder, before we cut to our short break, you can always find the rest of today's show and previous shows by checking us out online at agtoday.net or by searching for Agriculture Today on the podcast streaming platform of your choice. We're cutting to that short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be right back.
This is Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. The presence of the emerald ash borer continues to be confirmed in additional Kansas counties. Matt Norville, Community Forestry Program Coordinator for the Kansas Forest Service, says the invasive insect has now been confirmed in 15 Kansas counties.
We have Nemaha, Lyons, which were detected this year, Wyandotte, Johnson, Leavenworth, Douglas, Jefferson, Atchison, Donovan, Shawnee, Miami, Jackson, Brown, Osage, and Franklin. The first one was in Wyandotte County in 2012.
That's something that's been showing up here, but it's actually been maybe dating back to the 1990s?
Well, the first detection was in 2002 in Michigan, near Detroit. It's an invasive insect that we believe came in on pallet shipping material from Asia or from Russia, and it kind of got a stronghold there, and it's slowly been spreading all across the country. Isolated populations even showing up in Colorado, where there probably wasn't any other EAB within hundreds, if not thousands of miles.
So how is it traveling then from, city to city?
City from city, if a neighboring county has it, it's easy for the insect to fly. They have wings when they're an adult, so they're easy to fly. There's always wind events, especially in Kansas, where it gets really windy, where it can spread longer distances, but humans also spread it. Some of the populations are spreading firewood. Someone has an ash tree die. They go off to college. The dad says, take some firewood with you to have a fire at your new place. And the kid never has a fire. And then, come springtime, summertime, the adults emerge. And if you have two adults that are male and female, they can find each other and create a new population that way. So some of it's natural and some of it's human.
And the detection is actually kind of a long detection period?
Yeah, detecting it with 100% certainty is difficult because we need a live specimen. So we can look at the signs and symptoms of the tree, such as a declining canopy, epicomic sprouting or sprouting coming from the base of the tree, from the trunk of the tree, And we could even find the specific galleries that are S-shaped or stair-shaped. But until we have an actual live emerald ash borer in our hands, KDA can't say this is what it is.
How do they know that it is the emerald ash borer?
From very, very descriptive measurements. So any insect or any animal or any tree, we have a taxonomic sample of it, and, there's different measurements that say if different parts of the insect measure this much or this color, then it's this insect. And that's why we leave it up to the state entomologist to make that final decision, because there is lookalikes that can confuse homeowners or even foresters, but it's very hard to confuse the state entomologist.
Is it safe to say that at some point, if you have an ash, you're probably going to have a problem?
The ash trees that are most common out here are the green ash from the white ash. They're all part of the Fraxinus genus. But if you have a Fraxinus genus, there's even a blue ash, that can be affected by EAB and eventually killed by EAB.
So what's the recommendation then if you have ash trees?
So there's insecticides you can treat it with. If your tree's over 15 inches in diameter or breast height, you do need a professional. They do systematic injections where they actually inject it with a syringe into the tree. But you got to provide the insecticide to the tree indefinitely. So you got to treat it every 2 to 3 years, and those numbers really start adding up. So my professional recommendation all across the state is look at the ash trees you have around on your property or throughout your town. Decide the value of them. If they're very valuable, high value, you may want to come up with a treatment plan. If they're so-so, you may want to replace them with a different tree and just wait for the insect to be in your area, for the decline to start happening. Remove the tree then promptly. We don't want dead ash trees, especially from EAB, because they get extra brittle. So they can really break under a snow loading or wind loading event. But then plant it with a different tree species, and diversity is the best. Kind of the reason we're in this predicament that we are with, 70 million ash trees already destroyed is because of what happened with elm trees and dead elm disease. Back in the 50s, they killed all the elm trees. Then we're like, well, we have another tree that'll do the same thing as the elm tree, the ash tree. And we put all our eggs in one basket. So by spreading out the tree species, we're more likely to have surviving trees in the future, because once an insect comes, an invasive insect such as EAB comes, it will attack every species within that genus. So by splitting up the genus, we have some reinforcements there, or a safety net.
There are some trees that are native to Kansas that would be better options?
Yeah, we have a bunch of different trees that are native, or even non-native if you're in a community aspect. Everyone's always going on about native trees, which are good, but non-native trees that are not invasive are also good. Just because we're trying to plant nature in communities doesn't mean it has to be native, because we're also planting it around concrete, buildings, cars, a lot of people. A lot of that stuff wasn't native here already, But we want to make sure we plant trees that are not going to cause future problems like we've had with Callery pear or Russian olive. Because Kansas is such a vast area, there's a lot of different ecosystems, growing conditions out here. So I recommend checking our website. We have tree lists for every part of the state. The Northeast, Southeast, Northwest, Southwest, they all have their respective tree list. So from there, there's a bunch of different trees you can plant, from maples to oaks to even magnolias and bald cypress or dawn redwoods, which is a prehistoric tree that at one point we thought was extinct.
Good point, because what may work in Northeast Kansas is not going to work in Northwest Kansas.
Or Southwest Kansas. Northeast and Southwest. We're right along that meridian line where it really has the precipitation changes from, 100-plus inches of rain or less than 16 inches of rain.
I think one thing people are always concerned about is the fact that they might have to replace a large tree with a small tree. But again, I think silver maple was maybe popular because it was a fast-growing tree, but we need to be careful with what we're planting.
Yeah, silver maple wouldn't be one I would recommend. There's a lot of other good maples out there, but silver maple, they tend to have a lot of breakage, which, trees, while they are vastly beneficial, the benefits greatly outweigh the negative effects of them. You also want to have a properly cared tree that's not going to drop a branch on top of your new truck.
In terms of the disposal, you mentioned making sure that you're really cleaning up the ash.
Yeah, if it's not infected and you're just trying to be preemptive, we don't have to worry about the chip size too much because it's not like the insects living in there. But if you're basically going to say, I'm going to cut all my ash trees down and then ship them to a different county as firewood, you're spreading the insect. We do not want that to be happening. There's the big marketing thing about don't move firewood, and It's always nice to have firewood when you show up to a campsite, but the problem is when people don't burn it all right away, and it kind of hangs out there, and especially if it gets tossed in the woods or something, you could be transporting EAB from the northeast part of the state to the southwest part of the state like that, instead of giving it more time and having a more natural progression. Because we do know EAB will spread throughout the state. It's not going to just stay isolated in these counties it's in already.
We're moving into that firewood season, so you really want to be careful when you're purchasing your wood?
Yeah, I would just recommend purchasing it locally. Once you get to your site and get it established, and you go into town for groceries, maybe picking a bundle or two of firewood there, or collecting it from, dead and down trees that are already on the ground. But I don't recommend moving the firewood around.
Is this a time of year when we could start planting if we wanted to?
Yeah, fall time's the second best time of year to plant in the state. I would say springtime's a little bit better, right when the ground's unfrozen and frost is out of the way, but not when it's too hot already. Fall time's not a bad time either. I would wait till everything's in dormancy before planting, because you don't want to be giving the tree mixed signals. It's also why I don't recommend fertilizing your tree in September with high nitrogen, because that'll increase growth. Especially for deciduous trees or trees that lose their leaves every year, you want them to start heading into, what people think as hibernation or dormancy.
We also want to consider just where we're placing the trees in terms of our landscape, and whether we're, like you mentioned before, too close to the garage or too close to the house.
Yeah, right tree, right location is a good saying we use. A tree could always become a problem tree depending on where it's planted. Planting a spruce, big evergreen on a four-way stop at a corner that blocks visibility, that's a danger. That's not a good tree to plant there. Don't even look side to side. Also look up and down. What's above you? If you have electrical lines above you, I wouldn't be planting a big sycamore tree that's going to grow into that and cause problems in the future. I would stick with a smaller tree like a crabapple. So looking at your site constraints about space, looking at the mature size of that tree, and making sure it has space to grow without interfering with your house, your garage, the sidewalk, anything like that.
You mentioned diversity, and I'm assuming that means planting several different species throughout the landscape?
Yeah, different species and different genus. Genus and species, they're highly related, and if an insect can attack one species in a genus, more than likely it can attack that other species in the genus. White ass and green ass, they're the same genus, different species. That's what we're seeing with that. I would recommend looking at it from a genus standpoint instead of a species standpoint, so looking at different types of oak, or looking at oaks and maples, not just a bunch of different types of oaks. But yeah, if you check out our preferred tree list online, we even break it down our soil characteristics, whether it's a well-drained soil or soil that, stays moist throughout the year.
And again, going back to the ash trees, if you have any concern, you can probably have it tested, but maybe just removal is the best option?
Yeah, as far as testing if you have EAB in your tree or not, that would really take removing limbs and then removing the bark from the limbs and seeing if we can see those galleries there. My recommendation would be start budgeting, start saving for removal of your tree. Save up for that, and then in the meantime, figure out what tree species you want to be looking at outside your window 20 years from now, and then planting those trees nearby.
That's Matt Norville, Community Forestry Program Coordinator for the Kansas Forest Service. For a list of recommended trees for your area, or to learn more about EAB, visit kansasforest.org. Agriculture Today continues in a moment over the K-State Radio Network. This is Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. We end today's program with this week's Milk Lines. There's a nationwide effort underway to increase participation in 4-H. K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk discusses how 4-H can help fill some of the needs of Gen Z, including making them feel more connected socially and more confident. He says that dairy producers can also play a part in helping local 4-H clubs by becoming volunteers, inviting 4-H clubs and members to their dairy, and possibly leasing animals to 4-H members who don't have a dairy farm of their own.
Today I'd like to give a shout out to our Kansas dairy producers and encourage them to consider what they might do to help the next generation. In our high schools around the state, Gen Z sits in class during the day, and as we look at Gen Z and some of the characteristics that they have, we may have an opportunity to actually be of help. As we look at Gen Z, we've noticed that since COVID, there's been a dramatic decrease in math and reading skills. We also notice that socially they feel less connected and less confident than previous generations. So, how can you help? Well, there's this little thing called 4-H. Many of you probably participated in 4-H when you were younger. It really helps with positive youth development. One of the things that we have noticed through some research that has been recently reported is that those students that had a positive youth development effort are 2 times more likely to become leaders in the future. They're also 3 times more likely to participate in community service and 2 times more likely to be living a life with intentionality and purpose. So, how can 4-H help? It's really interesting that the Georgia Boot Company, along with others, has started a new program within 4-H called Beyond Ready. The goal of this program is to expand participation in 4-H. They would like to see at least 10 million young people involved in 4-H by 2030. Why? Well, 4-H involves hands-on learning. This develops confidence, creativity, leadership, and resiliency, things that our current generation that is in high school seem to be lacking and desiring to gain. So, what can you do as a dairy farmer? Well, number 1, you could consider volunteering as a 4-H leader. You can invite your local 4-H club to your farm and share what you do every day. You never know, some of those folks that come to visit may be future employees for your dairy. You can also offer to do things like lease animals for showing during the summertime to those students that do not have a dairy farm of their own. This might also increase activity around your farm and, again, help develop some future employees for your dairy. This is Mike Brouk, K-State Research and Extension, letting our dairy industry know that 4-H could have great benefits to the younger generation, but it requires involvement on our part.
Thanks, Mike. And while we have a moment, USDA has announced another round of funding applications are being accepted through its Organic Dairy Marketing Assistance Program. Rod Bain has more.
Making a return in 2024, a USDA program designed to assist organic dairy producers.
We made this assistance available back in 2023. We had the resources to be able to offer it again in 2024. This is a section of the industry that is pretty hard hit with these additional marketing costs. And we thought that this would be an opportunity to help keep our small organic dairies in operation as they continue to sort of weather all of these challenges that really aren't within their own controls.
Farm Service Agency Acting Deputy Administrator John Burge says $58 million is now available to producers through the Organic Dairy Marketing Assistance Program, ODMAP, a one-time cost-share payment based on marketing cost on pounds of organic milk.
It provides assistance to organic dairy producers of milk from cows, goats, and sheep. The applications are being accepted this year through November 29th.
At local FSA offices. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
And don't forget to listen to the podcast version of Agriculture Today. Visit agtoday.net or using a podcast app on your mobile device, type these search words, Agriculture Today, Kansas, and you'll find this program. Tap the subscribe button, and new episodes of Agriculture Today will automatically arrive on your device every weekday. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.